Now, today, we are gonna see, what if Orphan Harry Potter was adopted by the Storm Dragon Emperor? Join Patreon for early ACESS of Super Op stories, also adult and steamy Harry Potter stories too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. Prologue. A dragon and a baby. Azulong was the dragon of the East, sometimes also referred to as the Storm Dragon, and he really hated it when the king called him Zuzu. Even if he was the king of all dragons, there was very nearly war between them the last time Azulong had been at court, such as it was. Most of the time, Azulong spent his time wandering the worlds. He particularly enjoyed the new worlds, created by humans that were connected to several real worlds. Of course they were all real, but the digital worlds, as they were called, had slightly different origins than all the Earths roaming about creation. At least there he didn't have to worry about the other dragons horning in on his business, or making fun of him for helping out human children. That was until the edict came down that everyone was to adopt a human child, that is. The edict really made no sense, until Azulong discovered that the king had met with all those with future sight just before the edict came down. Of course when it said everyone, it meant everyone. And so Azulong was currently searching for an orphan to adopt. That he was currently searching in nay of those alternate Earths where dragons were myths and magic was in hiding, well that was of little consequence. Azulong paused and sniffed the skies as he continued over Europe. Okay, he corrected himself. Dragons were barbarian beasts contained by the wizards of this world, but the vast majority of the world considered both dragons and magic to be pure fiction. Too bad there was no digital world here. And besides, the edict never said where the orphan child had to come from, only that they were adopted and brought back to the throne world, a world of near-infinite magic, to be raised as a dragon slayer. The large, snake-like blue and white dragon flew through the skies, high in the atmosphere, using his power of sight and some of his abilities that came with the title of Dragon of the E. Asked to search for destiny lines and see who might be compatible with him. After all, not just any wizard could be the Storm Dragon Slayer. It wasn't until he reached the westernmost edge of his domain in England that he finally found a child that could potentially be the one. He was young, just over a year old, and yet his magic was strong. His destiny, however, was fractured. If Azulong left him, he would be drawn into a battle of good and evil that would threaten his very soul. If Azulong took him, he would be drawn back to this world and into the same battle of good and evil, but he will be stronger and better prepared to face the threat. Looking closer at the boy's potential and the lines of destiny, the massive fanged maw beneath his blue and yellow mask turned to a frown. His blue, and white silvery scales sparked with raw energy until he looked more like his Azulongmon persona than a true dragon. He calmed himself when he saw that he was brewing a killer storm in his anger. And that alone was enough to make his decision. That he was saving a child from a lifetime of abuse and neglect just cemented it. He calmed the storm and made himself invisible to all human detection. And flew down to the area known as Little Whinging, Surrey. He only had to loop the very small town once to find what he was looking for. A small street with identical houses up and down it, and the LIGHTS along the street going out one after the other. He moved so his head was directly over the street in question and breathed as quietly as a dragon is able to. He listened with interest as the wizard and witch, identifying each other as Professors Dumbledore and McGonagall, talked about current events. He had to move slightly out of the way when the flying motorcycle and giant identified as Hagrid arrived with the Chosen One. Chosen by Azulong. The Storm Dragon of the East suppressed his growling as much as possible as he listened further, and then the three magic users left much the way they had arrived. Once he was sure they were gone, he punctured the wards already in place and erased them as though they had never been. He then, gently, picked up the sleeping babe and flew up into the air. Heading east as fast as he could fly, he enshrouded young Harry James Potter in a protective orb of energy and dropped all methods of hiding once he reached China. It was not easy moving between worlds, and given he now had a passenger, he would need all the energy he could use to safely traverse back to the throne world. Especially since all the dragons of the court would be arriving there soon. Idly, Azulong wondered if his friend Grandine had found herself a child yet. If she had, perhaps he could introduce young Harry and they could be friends. And he had no doubt that whenever Igneel, his best friend, got around to finding his child, they too would be friends. Gathering up the required energy, Azulong picked up speed, and once he was over Kyoto, Japan, the portal opened up and H.E. and the infant Harry Potter disappeared into the eye of a storm in a flash of light. Earthland. 7 years later, Harry James Potter laughed and giggled as he flew literal circles around his father. They were hunting for lunch, and Harry was taking the opportunity to practice his flying skills. He loved flying, always had, for as long as he could remember, and he suspected even longer. Catching up with his father's head, he waved at the ancient dragon's left eye, before something caught his own eye and he swooped down to gobble up a small storm cloud, sucking up the lightning first before everything else followed in short order. Once finished, he let out a loud burp, and a bit of the cloud escaped his teeth. He giggled again and then roared out as he exploded with magical power. He grinned down at his talons and ran his tongue over the fangs in his mouth and reached up to feel the scales growing over his face. He was sparking all over now and his skin had taken a slightly blue tinge, but mixed with white, so it made him look more silver-like at a distance. He shot up through the air faster than ever and blazed back up beside his father, who hadn't stopped and was now several hundred miles away. Harry caught up to him in under a minute, and was soon flying ahead of him in short order. "Harry," Azulong admonished with his echoing voice, "Dragon Force is not to be used so frivolously. Though it still amazes me that one as young has attained it at all." Harry laughed and answered, "Not to worry, father. I only call upon this state when I truly need it. Like outracing you." He laughed again and flew ahead even faster. "Ha!" Azulong roared in laughter, as if, "You little punk. You're 1,000 years too young to beat me in a sky race." Later, once both father and son had landed on solid ground and were resting, the storm dragon of the east was giving Harry a few pointers on his magic. "Arshiryu no Hoko." Harry puffed up his chest, holding both hands in front of his mouth like he was about to blow into a pipe. And then the silver-blue magic circle appeared in front of him and a silver-gray twister with 100-mile-an-hour winds blasted straight out, highlighted with blue lightning. The giant rock he was aiming at stopped the blast for all of half a second before it exploded, and everything else around it was eroded away by the wind until nothing but dust and sand remained. "Good, good, good." Azulong praised him. "Perfect balance. Excellent spin in the vortex, and you've started adding lightning. Add in a bit of ice and it will be complete." "I know," Harry grumbled, acknowledging his failings. "Most I can manage right now is a cold wind. I just need to head up north and taste some snowstorms. Then I'm sure I'll get it mastered." "You don't have to be perfect every time, Harry," Azulong assured him. "I'll love you the same either way. And sometimes not being perfect shows you something that you might have missed and can help you in ways you'd least expect it. Now, show me your talons and then I want you running." Note I said running, not flying, all the way around that mountain over there. "I'll be following along. When you get back here, without stopping once, we'll see about taking a trip up north." "Yeehaw!" Harry jumped up and cheered and then brought forth his magic circle and clenched his fist as he cried out, "Arshiryu no Kajutsu." AF. Chair Harry took off running for the mountain. Azulong let out a long sigh and looked up at the sky, specifically at the constellation that was the same on every world with dragons on it, the constellation humans call Draco. He growled, but restrained himself. He had little time. The sun was rising, and it was only a few minutes until 7 in the morning. He took to the sky and opened a series of portals through different worlds simultaneously, allowing him to spend the minimum amount of time on each to get what he needed. He was going to miss Harry's birthday, but he hoped to make up for that with some really great presents. A minute before 7, he returned to the hillside and deposited the presents as well as the scroll explaining things. And then he left. An hour later, Harry crested the hill, panting and soaked with sweat. He wasn't too worried that he couldn't see his father. The ancient dragon often went invisible, mostly to keep from panicking the humans. When he saw the pile of presents, he cheered, and you wouldn't have guessed that this 8-year-old boy, almost 9, had just run over 50 miles in under 2 hours from the energy he displayed at the sight of those presents. "Awesome. Thank you, Azulong Otosan." Harry screamed to the empty air as he tore open the first package. He went through all of them in short order. It was all useful things, as dragons were not humans, and didn't believe in useless junk or toys or anything for purely enjoyment sake. The first present had been a completely new outfit. Harry had stripped right there on the hillside and happily put on his new white pants, white tank top, blue turtleneck, and blue and silver jacket that was actually adult-sized, so fell to halfway down his shins when he had it on. The rest consisted of other useful items that either Harry or Azulong had found necessary at various times over the years, but didn't have on hand at those times. Silver, steel-toed boots that were a size too big, but Harry was sure he would grow into. A pair of prescription goggles with high-strength straps. A datapad with an Everlife battery contained in a titanium steel alloy Kevlar-coated scratch-resistant case with straps just as strong as his goggles. And the mother lode, a brick of C4 plastique with primer cord and blasting caps. There are very few situations in life that can't be handled with massive amounts of explosives. After putting everything on and away in his backpack, Harry took to the air and started taking big sniffs. After all, not much could hide from a dragon slayer's nose, especially not a dragon. And they often played this game, where Azulong hid, sometimes a far way away, always invisible, and Harry had to find him using nothing but his senses. Harry stopped mid-sniff and frowned. He fell back, to the ground and actually put his nose right on the ground where he knew Azulong had sat and took another long sniff. He strained his ears and listened. He heard everything around him for miles. He heard the clouds overhead. He heard the earth spinning through space beneath him. He heard the sun shining its heat down upon him in one constant, never-ending explosion of energy, natural magic in and of itself. He heard humans and animals and plants and everything else in the world. He smelled it all too. What he could not hear, or smell, or sense at all, were dragons. Anywhere, nearby or far, there was not a sound or a scent or the feel of any dragon at all. And that was impossible. Azulong Otosan, Harry called out, tears forming in his eyes. He heard something. Igneel, Igneel, where are you? Where did you go? Igneel, Grandine, Grandine, Grandine. The sound of children crying out, lost in the world all of a sudden. Harry transitioned into dragon force and wasn't even aware of he gathering storm clouds over a once peaceful valley. The true power of the storm wasn't in the effect of its presence, but in that to create one, it tied together the four primary elements of nature and magic. Earth, wind, water, and fire. The spin of the earth was mimicked by the spin of the storm. Lightning was the purest form of fire found on the planet, moving living energy. All that fire was and all that it could be all at once. Wind and water were pretty self-evident in a storm. So in order to be a storm dragon slayer, one had to be tied, intimately, with the four elements as well as magic. The elements of nature and magic cried out in sympathy with the children of dragons as they mourned the passing of an age. And one such child cried louder than all the rest. In the years to come, it would be known as the Week of Storms, as there was no place on the entire planet that wasn't bombarded by storms of every kind. In the north, snow and ice storms froze everything. In the desert, and wind storms flew with no boundary. Around the oceans, hurricanes raged. In the south, thunderstorms boomed and tore open the skies. The swamps and wetlands flooded. The mountains were slick with mudslides for days on end. In the west, tornadoes and twisters destroyed the landscape. And then, in the east, there were gentle rain showers without end. And flying all over the planet, from coast to coast, from sea to sea, a boy flew through the air, crying out for his father. To be continued. A Guild Called Fairy Tale. Chapter 1. A Guild Called Fairy Tale Fury. Magnolia. Fairy Tale Guild 3 years later. Say that again. What did you say? Naked Tem. Baka Hothead. Why you? Enough. Urza. Both boys suddenly shouted and were smiling and hugging each other. The redhead who had spoken stared them down. Her arms crossed over her armored breastplate. That's better. Fairy Tale needs unity, and the two of you fight far too often. Urza, fight me, the pink-haired boy suddenly shouted, shoving the black-haired boy away. HMPH. Urza turned abruptly at the snort and glared at the white-haired goth leaning brazenly back against a table just off to the side. Way to keep the troops in line, General San. Mirajan. Urza said the girl's name so it was more like the growl from a dangerous beast. Oh ho. Did you want something, Titania? Mirajan jibbed, before the two were suddenly head to head. Much as Natsu and Gray had been moments before. A sudden wind flew through the guild hall as the doors slammed open and sparks shot off of all the lacrima and pieces of metal. And the temperature dropped a couple degrees. There was a rumble of thunder and just outside the now open doors, everyone could see storm clouds covering what had once been a clear and pleasant day. The whole place suddenly shouted out greetings and complaints in equal moderation, the complaints mostly from the female half of the room that had worn skirts that day about the sudden draft indoors. Harry, oi! Natsu o Tudo. The newcomer shouted out, the wind dying down as he fully entered. Thought I told you, you don't get to fight Urza till you beat me, and you don't get to fight me until you beat Laxus. Ah, but Harry Neeson, Natsu whined. A blue cat with a green scarf on his back jumped up on the table beside them and said, But Laxus won't fight Natsu, because Laxus is hung up. That's stuck up, happy. Harry grinned and patted the talking cat's head with his free hand. He'd filled out quite a bit from 3 years ago, but he was still only 10 years old. Though his birthday was in just another month or so. His black hair was even more wind-swept and wild-grown than ever. His emerald-green eyes flashed beneath his ever-present goggles, and his blue-white-silver jacket fit him a bit better. But was still clearly too big for him. At the moment, he had a huge burlap sack over his right shoulder that was literally bulging at the seams. The lightning bolt scar on High's forehead was on display as his wind-swept black hair was tossed back so it was uncovered at all times. If it wasn't for the sense of dark magic coming from it. Whenever Harry got really angry, people might have said he was trying to mimic Laxus, the master's grandson. Harry just said, since he was at least 5 years younger than Laxus and Laxus hadn't gotten his trademark scar until after Harry had already joined Fairy Tail. That Laxus was copying him. Harry, good to see you. Were you successful in your mission? Urza asked, a slight blush in her face that nobody was going to comment on if they valued their lives. Of course, Harry happily chirped. Where do you think the giant bag of treasure on my back came from anyway? Oh, of course, Urza's blush soon covered her whole face and she looked down and to the side. Do you need any help with it? Nah, it's a light load. Even Natsu o Tudo could handle it, Harry shrugged, lifting up his goggles to wink at her. Nobody noticed the steam suddenly coming from her whole head. Nay, Harry Neeson. Natsu pestered his fellow dragon slayer as the green-eyed boy unloaded his burden at the bar, where Lysina was sitting on a tall stool, kicking her legs playfully while the master next to her sat on the bar itself. I got a job in another town coming up, can me and Happy, please? He started begging when Harry shaking his head before he'd even finished asking the question. Learn how to gate on your own, Natsu, said Harry. Or at least learn something beyond the basics. He was referring to Natsu's own Dragon Slayer magic. Fire Dragon Slayer magic. But it's hard, he whined. Happy chimed in. Brats. The master knocked both the pink-haired boy and the blue cat on the heads with his staff. Anything worth doing is going to be hard. That's obvious. Everyone knows that. Welcome back, Harry. Good to be back, master, said Harry with a grin. And yeah, Natsu, the master is right. Gate magic was really hard to learn. And I still learned it in a month, and had it mastered less than a year later. How come you wanted to learn so many different types of magic anyway? Natsu asked. Harry gave the other boy, who was his age though maybe a month or 3 older than himself, an incredulous look and replied, I know exactly 3 different styles of magic, Natsu o Tudo. And I'm only any good at 2 of them. And the third is more out of necessity than anything else. Storm Dragon Slayer magic, gate magic, and archive magic. And I suck at archive magic. Ain't that the truth? The master shouted. Have to use that computer of yours all the time to use it at all. Shut up, Harry screamed, punctuating it with a couple bolts of lightning, frying the master where he sat. But Natsu and I only know one kind of magic each. Happy commented from the top of the bar. And so did I when I first got here, Harry pointed out. The master, Lysina-chan and Mirajan really helped me out, and Urza and Gray too. Mistogen especially, really nice guy. Oh, and you too, Natsu. Oh Tudo. You've seen Mystogan. The whole place suddenly screamed at him. This was somewhat of a big deal as only the Master and Guildarts had reportedly ever met the mysterious member of Fairy Tale face to face. He was a legend among the guild, if for not other fact than he became an S-class wizard the same year that he joined the guild in the first place. And he joined roughly 1 month before the S-class exam for that year. Harry stuck his pinky in his ear and wiggled it a bit to get the ringing out of his ears. My point is that you all showed me that I didn't know everything and that if I'm going to find Azulong and Igneel and all the others, then I'm going to need all the help I can get. And knowledge is power, especially magical knowledge, which is why I'm still struggling with Archive. But Gate is a really useful magic. Natsu argued. That I learned as a reward for an S-class job when helping Guildarts with it. From someone that was a very talented teacher, explained Harry. Then teach me, Natsu begged. I suck at teaching even worse than I suck at Archive. Harry shot him down instantly. Happy helpfully agreed. Harry shot him a dirty look. Happy was happily munching on a fish and didn't notice. You know, you could ask around here. See if anybody would be willing to share or help you learn a new style of magic. Something that may be useful in the future, Harry suggested. Macau is trying to show me how to use my flames better, but I don't understand him most of the time, Natsu whined. Harry shrugged and accepted a drink of milk from the lady behind the bar. Well, Macau is a much better teacher than I am, not that that's saying much. Hey, so if you can't learn anything from him, or even listen here, I certainly can't teach you Gate, said Harry. Natsu put his thinking face on and then suddenly brightened as a light bulb went on over his head. Oh, Natsu, your ears are smoking. Happy happily commented as his friend and partner suddenly ran up to the bar. Listen, can you teach me, the white-haired shapeshifter asked with a curious smile. I want to learn new magic, like Harry. Can you teach me something? Please. The pink-haired boy actually dropped to the floor and bowed his head till it touched the ground. You want to learn transformation magic? Listen asked, sounding pleasantly surprised. Everyone that heard this exchange, i.e. half the guild, struggled to contain their snickering and soft laughter. Everybody knew what was going on between the two of them, but no one was going to say a thing until either one said something first. Natsu happily confirmed that he wanted to learn her magic. Why, Listena's voice had gone suspicious all of a sudden. Natsu rolled his eyes up and thought about it, and then grinned and replied, because it would help out in playing pranks on Gray and help me get away from Urza. And, Natsu's expression changed for a second, but only for a second before he continued with a bright smile, and it would be fun to learn. Listena blinked, and then she smiled brightly and happily said to him, I'll be happy to help you out Natsu. I'll meet you at your place after my next job. All right. Natsu leapt into the air and high-fived with a winged Happy. Can I learn too, Listena? Happy asked with a hopeful tone. Of course, she smiled wistfully. Harry smirked at the white-haired girl as she stepped up to the bar to get her own glass of milk. Don't say one word, okay? She said to him while keeping her bright and happy smile on her face. Harry just took a sip from his glass and kept smirking at her. Only after she was turned away did he whisper, better you than me. Oh, Harry, I think I may need some help later this afternoon. Would you mind helping me out? Listena's voice called sweetly across the bar. Get Elfman, I'm busy, he replied with a dour tone. Harry, you should help your comrades, said Urza. Why are you picking on me in the first place? Aforementioned Elfman whimpered at the mention of his name. His schoolboy outfit with coat and tie and neatly trimmed haircut completed the image. Yeah, you just don't want to get wrapped into your sister's hands-on lessons. Harry called back at him. Looking back to Listena, he said to her, I was not kidding when I told Natsu I suck at teaching. Also, keep in mind he'd be challenging me to fight like 2 seconds into the first lesson. And more importantly, Harry jumped down and left behind a heavy tip on the bar for his drinks. I've got a job with my name on it waiting for me. Literally, he walked over to the stairs leading up to the second floor, where the S-class board was posted. Oh, well then, good luck. Listena called with a bright smile and a wave. Harry smiled back, and sighed with relief and kept on climbing the stairs. It wasn't until he was in front of the board had he noticed Urza had been behind him the whole way. That wasn't very nice, she stated, staring at the board as if she were looking for a job. I'm serious, I can't teach a dog to fetch, let alone teach Natsu o Tudo magic. He said back, pulling the job that really did have his name on it off the board. It was a rescue and retrieval job. A village in the east was being held captive by a dark guild and forced into slave labor. Among other despicable things, Harry idly wondered how the job even showed up on Fairy Tale's board and wasn't already taken care of by the Magic Council and the government. Until he noticed the name of the Dark Guild, Ouroboros Hydra. The problem was, they weren't officially a Dark Guild yet. Rumor had it, they were very on time with their bribes. I would just get in her way. And furthermore, it's really cute when those two hang out together like that. I don't want to get in the way of that. She scoffed and crossed her arms, then decided to change the subject. How is it that I'm still the youngest mage to attain S-class? Urza asked, and yet the master has granted you permission to take S-rank jobs. Harry grinned at the older girls, very nearly a woman, straightforward nature. Because I skipped out on taking the exam, he told her. Why? Didn't feel like it, he shrugged. As for why the master is letting me take S-rank jobs, well, in order for me to take any of those D-rank jobs that he keeps advertising out to everybody, he had to compromise to let me take one S-rank job per month. Just so long as it wasn't a year-long one or more. Oh, she pounded one fist into her hand as she realized what he meant, where you eat dangerous storms or start small rain showers and things like that. Exactly, Harry nodded. I'm a storm dragon slayer for bloody sake. Not a weather man. Catch is, unfortunately, I have to reserve the job. At least a week before I can take it. He then let out a heavy sigh, and I have to take an S-class wizard with me. So, Urza blushed very slightly and looked away. Why haven't you asked me before? Because you're always busy on your own jobs, he shrugged. Anyway, Mirajan offered to go with me. So long as she got half of the reward. I told her she could have all of it except for the magical item, provided she actually did any of the work. Mirajan, she exclaimed. Yeah, it was either her or... Harry frowned and stopped talking. You and Laxus are still fighting. It's the bastard's own fault. His attitude is... Harry fumed for a minute and held his tongue. What if I joined you for this mission? Urza asked out of the blue. Harry turned to regard her, and then answered, ask the master. My distance is going to be cut by half with 2 extra people, but I can manage. We'll have tea. Walk the rest of the way to the village, and I'm going to need to eat along the way, otherwise I'll be completely useless. Urza snatched the request from his hand, looked it over, and said, I know where you can get exactly that. Harry was intrigued. Eastern Fury 1 day later. A hurricane, huh, Harry observed, the 2 teenage S-class witches behind him on either side. It was being said a number of weather mages had predicted this storm making landfall in this area in a day or so. It seems they were off, said Urza, brushing her long red hair out of her face, but the wind just whipped it right back. Mirajan did the same with her white blonde hair, only to have to do it again a second later. Finally she just pulled her hair back into a ponytail and asked, why did you have to bring her along? We wouldn't even need to do this if it had been just you and me, Harry-kun. I'm not on a team and I'm not S-classed, Harry shrugged. Anyway, you're right, Urza, the storm won't hit until 2 days from now. This here, he gestured to the storm currently raging around them, isn't even a tropical storm. It's just a standard thunderstorm that's common for this area. I recognize the taste of the wind. A hurricane, on the other hand, is a whole different matter. He quickly took off into the air and was soon eating the storm. Lightning struck him, but he merely caught it in his hands and swallowed it as quick as it struck. Once the lightning and thunder had stopped, he disappeared into the cloud layer and things got weird for a minute. The clouds started to spin more rapidly, until one could actually see a vortex going up higher into the sky. In short order, it looked more like water going down a drain, but it was dark clouds going up into the sky. Before too much longer, however, the blue sky appeared and only a few puffy white clouds remained as the sun shone clearly and the wind died down to a bare minimum. Harry flew back down to the girls, brimming with energy. Okay, that gave me enough to get us there and finish the job, but I'm going to want to come back for that hurricane in 2 days. Hope the folks here appreciate the extra day of sunlight I gave them for free." He laughed and grabbed both girls' arms. "How is it you can eat a whole storm, but Natsu can only handle a small amount of fire?" Urza asked. Harry shrugged as he focused on his destination and his blue and silver magic circle appeared beneath them. "He's only mastered the basics, and I'm going to be burning off more than half of what I just ate in this gate here," he answered, "and besides, I do a lot more than just refill my magical energy with a full-on storm." "What did Master call it again?" "Oh yeah, I maximize my potential. Basically means I make it so I'm as strong as I can be all of the time without having to power up." Quote, "What does that even mean?" Mirajan snapped at him. Harry just shrugged and then activated his gate. The magic circle appeared and 3 bright blue rings circled them, making them transparent with the first, disappeared with the second, and gone with the third. Several hundred miles away, in the middle of the town square of the village they were rescuing, a magic circle appeared and then ejected 3 energy rings at virtually the same time. By the third pass the fairy tale wizards had arrived, and Harry was on his knees, gasping and sweating. "Yeah, I'm definitely stopping by to get that hurricane on our way back," he gasped. "We don't have time for that," Mirajan said, her voice lacking its usual sarcastic bite. "Indeed," said Urza. Harry looked up and noticed that he had dropped them off in the middle of the village, as he'd intended, but what they had not planned on was the entirety of the Ouroboros Hydra Guild surrounding them and having lethal spells already primed and aimed at them. "Well, bloody hell," Harry cursed, got to his feet and used what remained of the power he'd just devoured. "Dragon Force," he screamed as power exploded from him. And he transitioned into Dragon Force mode. All of the spells shot at them were stopped by the vortex of power and wind and lightning that Harry had put around them as he powered up. They're absorbing the elemental spells are knocking aside everything else. "Conso," Urza called, and was soon bearing her Armadura fairy armor. "Take over, Satan's soul," Mirajan snarled, transforming into her demon self. At last count, Harry told the others, Ouroboros Hydra had a little over 300 members. First 1 to 100 wins, and then gets to help out whoever is behind. Deal. The S-class mages shouted and immediately jumped into melee. Not about to fall behind, Harry started them off by taking a deep breath and shouting, "Arashiryu no Hoko." A few hours later, I won. No, it is clear that I defeated 105 of the foes before either of you. I am the clear winner. Like hell, I won. You wanna fight over it? Any subsequent battle will not change the facts. Harry sighed and chose to ignore the bickering girls behind him, instead approaching the village elder and presented the job request. They were all immensely grateful, in spite of the fact that their village essentially no longer existed. But they were willing to work to rebuild. Right on time, after all the fighting was over with, the army showed up in force. Thankfully by then, Urza and Mirajan had stopped arguing long enough to collect their reward from the now-defunct Dark Guild's leftover resources, and Harry collected the magical items that had piqued his interest in the first place. For an S-rank job, it was over in less than a few hours, which was a new record Harry believed. Sadly, Urza and Mirajan both burst his bubble by reporting that the record was still held by the master of the guild when he was still just a member of the guild, and his team completed an S-rank job in 32 minutes and 43 seconds. And that counts from the moment they picked the job off the board to coming back in to report it was successful. So far, only 3 teams had ever come close, only missing it by a few minutes or even just a few seconds. "I thought S-rank jobs were supposed to be potentially lethal," the 10-year-old asked the teenagers. "It's why S-class mages are the only ones that can go on them," Mirajan told him, her arms held suggestively behind her neck. When he glanced back at her, she winked. He smirked and winked back. She blushed and looked away. Hey, just because he was 10 years old, almost 11, didn't mean he didn't know how to play the game. There are also 2 S-class mages and an overachieving dragon slayer that could take the S-class exam whenever he wanted to, and also the fact that we took them by surprise, said Urza. The only surprise was that we were so much better than them. And that they were probably only expecting 2 instead of 3, Mirajan argued. They were there and ready for us, waiting. They had even prepared attacks the moment we arrived. Yeah, that was my fault. Harry raised his hand and admitted sheepishly. What did you do? Both girls asked in unison, glaring sparks at each other afterward. Like I told Urza, I have to reserve the job a week in advance. Harry explained. So, I sent a messenger ahead announcing that I would be coming, what time I expected to be there by, and where I planned to arrive. Urza and Anne exchanged incredulous looks and shouted at him, why would you do that? Harry just shrugged, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Anyway, you two go ahead and get started. I'm going to go catch that hurricane now. I'll catch up when I can, and I should have enough energy to get us all the way back to Fairy Tale, or at least Magnolia. Now wait a minute, Mirajan shouted. Harry, explain why you did that. Urza ordered. Bye. Harry waved as he gated out, the 3 rings of energy flashing over him before he disappeared entirely. Ooh, I hate it when he does that. Mirajan growled. HMPH. Urza crossed her arms and said nothing, but she was clearly peeved at her comrade's irresponsibility. Kids, they both muttered simultaneously. Then they glared at each other and the Animosity. Y continued to mount the further they walked. Further to the west, and down by the coast, Harry took a few minutes to catch his breath after that last long-distance gate. In all honesty, his magic POW! Could really only handle close or mid-range gates without any significant drain, but anything outside of 10 miles was going to take more magic out of him than he could easily replenish without major rest, or the power boost of a storm. That was the true reason, he silently admitted to himself, that he wouldn't teach Natsu gate magic. Natsu was only a few months older than him, but his magic power was at about half of what Harry himself had. If Natsu could use gate, he'd be wanting to use it all the time and would try to use it to get to every job, and Natsu often had jobs that took him miles outside of Magnolia. Places that often required a train or carriage to get to and from them. If Natsu, who had roughly half the magic power Harry had, were to travel hundreds of miles, like Harry had done. To sustain himself he'd either go into a coma, devour a tenth of the total food supply of all Fury in one sitting, or he would need to devour a fire big enough that it would engulf all of Magnolia and all the surrounding woodlands as well. At a minimum, thunder boomed. Harry opened his eyes and looked up. The clouds were even darker, and the wind had picked up to roughly twice what it had been during that thunderstorm he'd eaten earlier. Frowning, Harry sniffed the air and took a good long look at the sky and the horizon out over the ocean. It was odd. The storm shouldn't be hitting until the next day at the soonest. But it was already making landfall. Oh well, Harry shrugged and took off into the air. It must have picked up speed or something, he thought as he began to chow down on the storm clouds, sucking it up and converting it to magical energy as quickly as he could. He'd replenished his reserves after only a small percentage of the whole, but the storm was still coming. If anything, it had gotten even more powerful, he noticed. Anticipating the feast he was about to partake, Harry gleefully transformed into Dragon Force mode and started circling the hurricane, eating up the edges and not stopping once. Unfortunately, he never noticed that his spin increased the storm's spin, and thus the power of the hurricane, and though he was keeping it contained to a small lure area that just made it all the more dangerous. Until he gobbled up the last of it in one giant suction spin. It was only after he finished that Harry realized he had literally taken on more than he could swallow. Even with the magic he was burning through with Dragon Force and his other active magic, what he had just taken in would blast him apart from the inside out if he didn't find some way of releasing it. He'd have to go back and get Urza and Mirajan later, he figured. If he gated to Fairy Tale and then back to where Urza and Mirajan should be, that should burn off what he didn't eat and then still have enough left over for one last gate. Focusing on home, in his mind, he cast the gate spell, fully intending on appearing in Fairy Tale's guild hall and then move on to where Urza and Mirajan were. Instead, he felt all of his magic going into the gate spell, but by then it was too late. The magic circle opened up and swallowed him up and then it exploded. If he had further paid attention, Harry might have noticed his fellow Fairy Tale wizard, Mistogan on the cliff, and that the storm had a funny aftertaste. But then again, that funny aftertaste added a real kick to storm and is what made him lose himself and devour the whole thing, where normally he would have stopped after getting his fill and no more. And he never would have tried to eat a storm while in Dragon Force mode. That was just crazy. But crazy is what he'd been. Because Harry hadn't just eaten a hurricane-class storm, he'd devoured and absorbed the largest animus sent into Earthland to date. Mistogan raced back to the guild. He had to inform the master of this. To be continued. You can always go home again. Chapter 2. You can always go home again, right? Earth, London, England, Little Whinging, Surrey 4 Privet Drive. First thing Harry was aware of when he came to was that he was on a hard, stone surface and looking up at an overcast sky. The next few things all came in a rush. The air stank. The clouds overhead were not storms or even the outer rim of storms, but a mix of natural clouds and artificial emissions, and he was right outside a house of a kind he had never seen before. The street he was on actually held over a dozen other identical houses. Getting to his feet, he noticed a few other details. Each building was numbered, and he was in front of number 4, and that there were regularly spaced lamp posts, but they weren't light or fire lacrima. They actually looked like clear blown glass put atop metal poles. Having no clue as to what city, or even what country he was in right at the moment, Harry decided to err on the side of caution and decided to locate the nearest magic guild and work out everything else from there. One of the lesser-known advantages that comes from being a master of gate magic is by the point you are a master of it, you have to know pretty much where everything around you is at all times, including people, animals and buildings. Therefore, integrated into the magic and spells that are part of that magic is the capability to sense magic and structures and people and so on and so forth, but only while actually using the gate. Therefore, when Harry vanished from the doorstep of 4 Privet Drive for the second time in his life, he instantly tracked down and reappeared a moment later at the largest and nearest concentration of wizards. AKA Diagon Alley, London, England. Okay. Not exactly what I expected. Harry scratched his head, looking at the wall of an alley. Turning around, he saw the back entrance of what looked to be a bar or pub of some kind. Seeing only the one option, he went into the pub. The sign was written in a script that Harry hadn't seen for over 3 years, English. It said, "The Leaky Cauldron," and once inside he could see why. The place was a dive and all the windows were covered to keep people on the outside from seeing in. There was a large fireplace and wall candles and a candle chandelier hanging above for illumination. And everything looked no less than 100 years old, floors, walls and furniture included. There was a small crowd inside of all manner of characters. Harry ignored most of them and went up to the balding, nearly toothless proprietor behind the bar. At least he hoped he was the proprietor. Harry was just guessing since most people seemed to be looking at him like he owned the place. Taking a seat at the bar, Harry waited patiently and listened in on the language that was being used. Yep, English. It took him a while to identify it, but finally narrowed it down to a British accent with a variety of dialects being tossed about, also all British in origin. Harry was never so grateful to have been dragged around from world to world with a Zulong before now. He was doubly grateful for the education the ancient dragon afforded him, making sure that he could fluently speak and write and otherwise communicate clearly in every world they went to, as well as every country in Earthland back home. It hadn't taken him long to realize he was on another world, though it would take him longer to figure out how it had happened and how to reverse it, but having been to more than 300 different worlds by the time he was 6 years old, he knew how to recognize the signs by now. It's also why the master had gotten him to learn archive magic shortly after joining Fairy Tale. Because while he could speak and read and write in every language, and use Gate and Storm Dragon Slayer magic, he actually knew or understood very little about anything else. He learned everything he knew about history, finances, politics, and pretty much everything from archived information. It's also why he was so poor with it. Because everything he had archived was so very boring. Everything else, he learned from the others in the guild, such as how to get information at a bar. "Excuse me," said Harry in English to the barkeep. "Oh, hello there. What can old Tom do for you today?" he asked the young boy in goggles. "Where am I? Where is the nearest magic guild? Who is the proprietor here? Where is the nearest representative to the Magic Council? I have some urgent chores to take care of and I require their assistance." Of course, he had learned how to get information at a bar mostly from Urza. Direct lil. Thing, ain't ya? Old Tom laughed. Where's mum and dad, kid? Harry clenched his fist and blue sparks began to emerge as the temperature in the whole building dropped about 3 degrees. Either dead or missing, Harry replied with a toothy smile. Where am I? Where is the nearest magic guild? Who is the proprietor here? Where is the nearest representative to the Magic Council? Harry, unlike Urza, believed in giving people more than just one's chance to answer questions. Albeit, he only gave most people exactly one extra chance, so it wasn't much different in the end. I'm Old Tom, the P-Pro-Prop I own the place, he finally answered. Harry frowned and the sparks got bigger. In the Leaky Cauldron, just outside Diagon Alley, just off Charing Cross in London, England. He said in a rush. Don't know nothing 'bout no guild, and the only magic council I know of is the Ministry of Magic and they're over near East London, about a block away from St. Mungo's. Harry's frown deepened, but his hand stopped sparking. Before he could ask another question, a great horned owl flew down and dropped a letter off right in front of Harry. It then perched somewhere in the rafters. Harry read the envelope and casually noted it had his full name and detailed location on it, even which stool he was sitting on at the bar, before tearing it open and flipping through what looked like an acceptance letter to some other guild called Hogwarts of all things. And people made fun of his own guild because it had the word fairy in its name. Harry lit a spark between 2 of his fingers and lit the letter on fire. He then ate the fire in front of Old Tom and everyone there. He burped out some smoke and then took a glass of water sitting on the bar and drank it in one gulp. Finally, finished with his small snack, he asked Old Tom. How do I get into this alley you were talking about? I appeared in the alleyway behind this establishment, but I highly doubt that alone is called whatever you call that alley place of yours. You just have to tap the bricks with your wand, Old Tom started to say, but the young lad's incredulous look had him offering, why don't I just go ahead and open it for you? Thank you for your kind offer. I accept. Harry jumped down and led the way. Tom felt it would be wise not to keep the volatile lad waiting. And hopefully somebody would get a hold of the orders sooner rather than later. Pulling out his computer tablet, the very same gift from Azulong, Harry activated his archive magic. A few hours later, Harry had thoroughly explored Diagon Alley and pushed his archive magic to the uttermost limits with all the new information he'd come across. There was no central archive link to connect to unfortunately, so he'd had to do it the hard way, by scanning. Scanning involved at last a peripherally active participation on his part in absorbing the information, meaning he had to use his eyes and ears and couldn't just wave his hands like more experienced archivists could. He'd come across a couple of bookstores and avoided going in them until last, and was glad he did so because both were larger on the inside than they looked on the outside, and every available space was filled with books. Although that invisible book of invisibility was quite a read, he may have to see about adding a 4th branch of magic to his repertoire. Unfortunately none of what he had managed to add to his archive was going to be able to help him get back to fairy tale. It would seem that every magic user on this world was a holder type, and it was considered myth and legend for any that would use magic without these so-called wands they all wave about. Harry, of course, immediately saw hundreds of ways they used magic that had nothing to do with a wand, but they were all quite insistent about it. They also all kept calling him some kind of slur word he didn't recognize at all. Muddle or something like that. He ignored them and continued seeking a way to get back home. Scotland. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Albus. Professor Minerva McGonagall shouted, running into the office of her employer. Well, as much as she ran in the first place. Regardless, it was much quicker than she normally moved. Minerva, my dear, whatever is the matter? Albus Dumbledore questioned when his deputy headmistress burst in, out of breath and still shouting. Look, found him, Potter, list, she shouted between gasping lungfuls of breath. In her hands was the Hogwarts school registrar, the list of all student names and addresses for sending out their Hogwarts letters for the next school year. At the name Potter, Dumbledore was immediately on his feet and had snatched the registrar out of McGonagall's hands before she'd finished shouting. Looking for himself, he was not disappointed. In fact, he saw the first glimmer of hope that he'd had in more than 10 years. They had found Harry Potter at last. Finally, Minerva, I have found him. I have found Harry Potter, at last. Old man actually sighed with relief, and the Transfiguration teacher could see seemingly years of weight come off of the headmaster like morning mist under the sun's rays. I must go to him at once, before he disappears from us yet again. I'm off, Minerva. I'm off to Diagon Alley. Leaky Cauldron. So far, Harry had found nothing in this magical community that would help him in getting home. He'd spent the early part of the day. It had been after lunch, so he couldn't say morning, going all over and through the magical shopping district, had even barged right into the Goblin Bank at the end of tea. He street there and attempted to barter some cooperation. I.e., he promised to stop breaking stuff if they promised to help him. They'd given him a bunch of vaults, but assured him that, despite whatever myths existed about goblins, travel between worlds was not something they could do. He'd accepted the vaults and even inspected them. One was filled with a bunch of family heirlooms, books, and unks full of all kinds of interesting stuff plus some gold. The other was filled only with gold. Harry archived all the books with his tablet and, thanks to one of those trunks already there, packed all the interesting stuff into it. And he meant all of it, and then the trunk shrunk itself down to the size of a food can, which he then pocketed. After seeing that he would get no help from this land's magic community, Harry turned his attention to the commoner side of things. He went straight to the largest library in the city and set about archiving everything there. While there in the library, his tablet informed him that there was something similar to a central archive link available. A bit of investigation told him that it was called the Internet, which he actually recognized somewhat from the few digital worlds his father had taken him to in the past. He attempted to download this internet, but unlike all the data he could scan from books and other sources, there was just way too much information for him to just stream through his tablet and into his own magical archive. So, he tried to compress and download it that way. Once all the information had been compressed, Harry discovered that he'd really only retained about 1/4 of what he'd attempted to archive. And most of that was just raw data, unfiltered information from a variety of sources that would take him years to sort through and index. Depressed at his pathetic skills with archive, especially as he found it so necessary all of a sudden, Harry had returned to the Leaky Cauldron and requested a room for the night. Hopefully it would only be one night. Once in his room, he set about doing something he was supposed to be doing at least once a day, but had only been managing probably once a week to once a month. Which was sorting through all the information he had archived, and then doing the magical equivalent of a defrag and filing it in an easy-to-access recovery system. Some information could even be outright deleted. For example, everything pertaining to the word muggle. Oh, and all the porn he'd gotten from the internet too. He'd finally learned what that meant, enough to figure out that nobody who used it the way they were using it knew what it meant. If they did, well, there would probably be some embarrassment on the side of the one using the term, and a war started by those it was being used on. When he had finished, he discovered he could now retain all the information, that he could let his tablet do the auto-indexing and it wouldn't take a couple lifetimes to complete, just several hours. Thankfully those hours could be spent by him by getting some rest. It had been a long day after all, what with starting the day off with an S-class job, a bunch of long-range gates, dealing with Urza and Mirajan, defeating a nearly dark guild, and then all his running about since waking up on that doorstep in that weird neighborhood. Shaking his head to clear the dark thoughts from his mind, he turned his attention back to his tablet. There wasn't a lot Harry could do with his archive. Oh, he could do the basics. He'd learned enough to be able to do that, no problem. He could download, upload, scan, and search. Same as any archivist. Not to mention communicate with other wizards telepathically and treat their brains as computer terminals. His one weakness was that he couldn't use the hard light constructs, or do any of the computing in his head. He had to rely on his PC tablet and use it the same way a holder-type wizard used a wand or other magical focus. With his tablet, he could do just about anything that any archivist could do, really. But the true masters of archive magic could do so much more with information it was scary at times. Some of them, if they had shivved all the information available about a style of magic, could actually use that magic the same as if it were theirs, and without having to spend years studying it the way most others would. Harry, if he were being truly honest and not self-depreciating about it, was about average with his archive magic. He could do the basics, and he could retain and save a lot of information in his archive. If he kept up with his maintenance, that is. And he could also do one or two experienced things, not advanced, not by a long shot, but some things that were more than just the basics. For example, what he was doing now was creating a program, specifically a search and discover program, that would sort through all the information he had archived, and would archive in the future, and identify anything relevant and then produce a result of its findings when it completed. But again, he had to use his tablet in order to use archive magic at all. Without his tablet, he would not be able to so much as open a program. At the moment, however, he was programming it to search for any means possible of getting back to Fairy Tale. So far, no luck. Still, that did not mean he was giving up hope, and it turned out that thanks to those vaults of his, and the gold inside, he got a lot more than just a room at the Leaky Cauldron. In his search for answers, he'd come across a pet store. And in that pet's store was something that he never thought he'd see the likes of again. It was a large egg. An egg very similar to the one Happy was hatched out of. Only where Happy's egg was blue and white swirls, T's one was green lightning bolts on a yellow shell. At least, it had been yellow, making the proprietor of the pet store think it was either a golden egg, or a dead dragon egg. Harry bought it anyway, and the moment the egg was in his hands, the shell changed to a pearly white, still with green lightning bolts running across it, of course. Harry had taken the egg back to his room and was currently sitting next to it, keeping himself occupied until it hatched. Idly, he wondered if it was going to be a cat like Happy, or maybe he finally had found a dragon egg. Well, if he had, it would probably be one of the local dragons then. He'd heard them in his searching before. Wild beasts, with barely any minds to speak of, at least not when compared with the dragons Harry had grown up being around. A Zulong wouldn't even bother trying to talk to the dragons of this world, of that Harry was sure, so he wasn't even going to bother going to them for clues on where a Zulong would be now. The egg beside him rattled a bit. He put his hand on top of it and it stilled. He pulsed some of his magic through it. Lightning magic, but only enough to warm it and give the creature inside some pleasant tingles. The rattling increased for a bit, but quickly settled. Harry, familiar with the sensation of this particular magic effect, just smiled and wrapped the blankets around it a little tighter. A few moments later, there was a knock on his door. Harry ignored it and finished the last few lines of his search spell and then vanished the magical screen construct he'd been using. The knock came again less than 10 seconds later, and then again. Less than 2 heartbeats after that. With a sigh, Harry got to his feet, whispering to the egg, "Stay put. I'll get the door." He opened it just as the person on the other side was raising his hand to knock yet again. Giving the visitor a once-over, he glared at the old man with the long silver beard and hair and long weird-looking robes, and snapped at him, "Occupied." Before slamming the door in his face, he smirked and waited for 7 heartbeats before opening the door, again, just as the old man was raising his hand to knock one more time. Still occupied, he snapped and slammed it shut again. "Mr. Potter," the old man called through the door. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I must speak with you regarding something incredibly important." Harry blinked, and then pulled open a screen on his tablet, accessing his archive and pulled up everything he had on Albus Dumbledore. He wasn't impressed with what he read in just the first few lines, as it read the same as the resume of any person on the Council of Magic. He did not like any of those old fossils. He skimmed the rest of the basics and by the time he was halfway through he was why certain he knew what he was dealing with. Getting to the end of his current archive on the wizard, he'd found nothing to discount his first impression. Taking a deep breath, he put himself in what he liked to call his Magic Council frame of mind. Then he opened the door in a rush and shouted at the old man, "What?" Taken aback, Dumbledore actually retreated from the younger mage at first, before quickly marshalling his resolve and taking a step forward, opening his mouth to speak. Harry interrupted him. "You're from that guild that sent me a letter earlier today, aren't you?" Hogwarts something or other, he said, his eyes squinting mistrustfully beneath his goggles. Well, I hate to break it to you like this, and believe me I really do, as I would rather be using my storm dragon talons to make sure the message took. But I'm already in the red with the Magic Council about collateral damage as it is, so I'll just use words instead. I'm already part of another guild. I'm not leaving them for yours. And I have no interest in whatever it is you are offering. I'm a fairy tale wizard, as you understand the term. Now please leave before I change my mind about collateral damage. He started to slam the door shut again. But Dumbledore's first words actually gave him pause. I knew your parents. Harry slowly opened the door once more, giving the hinges a break, before speaking very slowly and softly. His eyes glaring at the old wizard in apparent anger. My biological parents were killed when I was a baby. My father, adoptive yes, but still my father, rescued me from the doorstep of. The kindest words he used were, human monsters, who lived on a world that I would gladly never set my eyes or feet upon. Now just to be clear, I have a family. Fairy Tale is my family. And as soon as I can figure out how I got here, I'll likewise be finding a way back to them. And I am not interested in whatever distractions you may have set up for me here. Now, this is that world, Mr. Potter. You have finally returned home. Dumbledore interrupted him. To the home of your parents. Of your destiny. We have much too. I already figured that out when I came to on the same doorstep my father rescued me from, nitwit. Harry snapped angrily at the wizard, keeping him on the defensive. I'm just grateful that they either never noticed, or weren't there to try and imprison me there with the, and correct me if I'm wrong. But since I smelled it and my nose never lies, I know I'm not wrong. The blood wards that were still waiting to be charged all around that entire structure. I may not have been educated from this world, but from what I know of magic, and that's more than you think I know, blood wards are only good for 3 things. Imprisonment, enslavement, and manipulation. Old name half a dozen different types of magic protections that would do whatever excuses you're about to give me 100 times better than whatever blood wards you, and yeah I'm sure it's you, set up at that place. Now, please leave. I am busy and do not wish to be disturbed. Harry slammed the door shut in the old man's face and did not open it again. The old man, on the other hand, did. Brandishing a gnarled and blackened stick at him, he then shot a number of spells at him in the form of jets of light. Harry dodged the red ones and used hastily formed icy wind shield to block or deflect the other ones with a short cry of, Arshiryu no Fubuki. He made sure nothing got past him to hit the egg still laying on his bed. When the old man stopped shooting spells at him, apparently thinking they were at a standoff, Harry glared angrily at the wizard. Big mistake, he growled before Dumbledore could say anything. Taking a deep breath, a silver-blue magic circle appeared beneath his feet as he held up both fists to his mouth and incanted, Arshiryu no Hoko. Before he knew what hit him, Dumbledore was blasted back out of the room, and then through the wall into the next one. And then through that wall and out of the building into the heart of Diagon Alley, where he crashed most painfully into the side of Gringotts wall beside their front door, doing quite some damage to it upon impact. It was only the man's rapid response in creating a Protega shield that had saved his life. Harry sniffed and slammed the door shut again, ignoring the hole in the wall right next to it. Hilton Resort, London 1 week later. Harry was relaxing in peace and quiet, the egg at his side almost sighing in content as it was snuggled in amidst a mountain of pillows and blankets under a specially ordered heat lamp. Harry was definitely of the opinion that the goblins of Gringotts were worth knowing, as they were the ones who set him up in such swanky digs. There was a rapid knock at the door. Harry sighed, exasperated, after having heard the person coming from a long way off. Reluctantly, he got up and went over to the door, wrapped up in one of the hotel bathrobes, and opened it very slowly. You just don't know when to give up, do you? Harry grumbled to his visitor. Mr. Potter, Dumbledore started to say, but was interrupted once again. I've been told that why damages Gringotts has to pay to this hotel are going to come out of the Dumbledore vaults, rather than my own. I even got them to put it in writing after I decided I wanted to stay here for a while until I figure out a way to get home. You know they've got an indoor pool and spa. Dumbledore stewed for a few moments, but when he was certain he wouldn't lose his temper any further, he spoke lowly and fully expecting to be interrupted again. "Mr. Potter, may I please come in so we may discuss some urgent matters?" Harry tapped his chin thoughtfully, and then smiled brightly at the old man and said cheerily, "No." He then slammed the door in his face once again. "Then I am afraid you leave me no choice, Mr. Potter," Dumbledore screamed through the door. He pulled out his wand and lifted it, preparing to incant a powerful spell that would remove all obstacles from his path to bringing Harry Potter back into the fold, back under his control, and get the plans he'd prepare. More than a decade passed rolling once more. The door suddenly flew open and Harry Potter stepped out. He closed the door behind him and then jovially walked past Dumbledore and went down the hallway towards the lifts. At no point did he even glance sideways at the powerful old wizard that had been preparing to use magic against him. In fact, the younger wizard completely ignored him as though he were not even there. Stunned by this casual dismissal, Dumbledore lowered his wand and hurried after the young Mr. Potter. He reached the corner before the older wizard could catch up, and when Dumbledore did finally make the corner, he saw no sign of Harry Potter, nor anywhere he could have gone. All the doors were closed and there had been no sound of one opening or closing. Turning back around, Dumbledore saw Harry at the complete other end of the hall, walking towards the lifts from the other side apparently. Harry paused and waved mockingly at Dumbledore before turning the corner at that other end. Dumbledore fumed. He'd been tricked, and by such a simple illusion spell. Still fuming, Dumbledore pulled out his wand once more and incanted, "Point me Harry Potter." The Elder Wand lifted itself up off his hand and spun about once in either direction before pointing, behind him. In the direction he'd first seen Harry going. Yes, of course, invisibility. Dumbledore accepted this explanation easily enough. Grabbing his wand, he quickly spun about and set off to track Harry down once more. Just outside the hotel, Dumbledore found Harry leaning up against the side of the building, across the street. Of course, by the time Dumbledore made it across said street, Harry was no longer there, and there were throngs of people all around, so using any sort of magic was out of the question. Out of nowhere, he felt a poke in his lower backside. He spun around quickly and found his quarry just standing there staring impatiently at him. "You have 15 minutes to convince me to listen to you. Seeing as I can't get rid of you, I may as well hear you out. If only to get you to stop saying the same things over and over again," said Harry. He gestured and then started to walk away. "Come on. Walk as we talk. What do you want with me?" Dumbledore nervously glanced around them at all the muggles walking past. "Come on, old man," Harry waved impatiently, "if you're worried out people overhearing us talking about magic. This is London. Believe me, I've only been here a week or so, and I have heard far stranger conversations than the one we're about to have." Reluctantly, Dumbledore had to admit the truth in that keeping up with Harry's rapid and youthful pace was no trouble for the defeater of Grindelwald, although he soon became concerned that the time limit imp OSED on him might very well expire before he'd fully made his case. He began speaking as quickly as he could. "A number of years ago, there was a dark wizard who called himself Lord Voldemort. He quickly gathered a rather strong following of supposedly like-minded individuals. They are today known as Death Eaters. They claim to be enforcing their beliefs of blood purity among our race, to ensure magical potency or some such rot. I knew better, however. It was all about power. And I suppose more than a bit of avarice. At least on the Death Eaters' parts. Voldemort, however, Harry couldn't help but notice the dark look in the old wizard's eyes. There was no twinkle at all. Voldemort was a mad dog. He is incredibly intelligent, and he proved himself a strategic force to be reckoned with more than once. But while he gave his followers the same line he gave everyone else, I could see the truth of it. He just liked hurting people, and controlling them, and he was also quite a bit lazy, I suppose. If he were a muggle, I'm fairly certain he would be one of those criminal masterminds you read about that has a hand in every pie, but always likes to kill his victims himself rather than let someone else do it." You think he's still alive?" Harry interrupted. Dumbledore nodded. It wasn't going to happen any time soon, but when the prophecy was heard, Voldemort was on the verge of toppling the ministry. I do not know if he managed to plan out exactly what he was going to do, if he was going to take over or not, or maybe put in some figurehead so he could remain in the shadows, but if you had not stopped him then. If Voldemort had not been vanquished the night he killed your parents and tried to kill you, I fully believe that our world would be quite a different place today. I didn't do a thing, Harry stated. But that's just it, my boy, Dumbledore pleaded with the younger wizard. You have no scope of how truly terrible things were at the time. Our government was a year, perhaps less, from surrendering to these terrorists. And then overnight, everyone knew he'd gone to kill you and everyone he had ever sought to kill was dead. But you didn't die, and he disappeared. You cut the head off the snake, Harry, and gave people hope. Let me repeat myself, since it doesn't seem to be getting through, Harry growled. I didn't do anything. I was a baby, barely a year old. Yeah, he tried to kill me and couldn't. So what? That doesn't make me special, that makes me lucky. And an orphan. Your scar says otherwise, Dumbledore pointed out. Harry frowned and wouldn't look at the old man anymore. You were hit by the death curse, Dumbledore told him. It rebounded off of you and struck him down. But I do not believe Voldemort would leave things to chance. I have reason to believe that he still walks this world. Perhaps not in the same form he once held, but I do not believe him to be dead. And there is a prophecy, which I fulfilled, Harry snapped, still not looking at him. Not entirely, the old wizard countered. Prophecies are open to interpretation, Harry snapped, reciting from his archive. I hereby decree this prophecy has been fulfilled according to my interpretation. If this dark wizard is still about and he comes across my path or even tries to take me down, I'll take him down instead, that much I will promise you. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life waiting and preparing for one stinking fight. I've got loads other fights to look forward to besides. Dumbledore blinked, not expecting that attitude at all. Anything else? Or are we done? Harry asked as they stopped at a crosswalk light that was currently red. The headmaster of Hogwarts sighed, deflating somewhat, and finally made his offer. I would like it if you would accept the offer to attend Hogwarts, Harry. Your parents apparently put in their will that I was to be left on a doorstep in the middle of the night right after I was orphaned, Harry sarcastically retorted, ignoring all the looks they were getting from the people milling around them. No, Dumbledore nervously glanced about them at the looks they were receiving. That was my doing. Against your parents' wishes. Harry slowly turned and faced the old man, who truly looked it at that moment in time. He crossed his arms, his blue and silver jacket bunching around his shoulders, making him look surprisingly intimidating. Excuse me, are you well? Dumbledore stuttered nervously, unable to meet the child's eyes. I needed to protect you, and you needed to go to a blood relative of Lily's. Your mother's blood. Well, you see, he stopped talking when Harry angrily put up his hand. Get somebody else to do your dirty work, Dumbledore, Harry growled up into the man's face. Because I am done dealing with you. I see you again after this. Slowly Harry's body rose off the ground until he was eye to eye with the old wizard. I will kill you where you stand. The light changed. Harry dropped back to the ground and walked off, leaving Albus Dumbledore standing there on the sidewalk, everyone around giving the old man disgusted looks and giving him a wide berth. He did not follow Harry any further. Instead, he turned around, turned down a blind alley and disappeared. To be continued. World Gate and Challenge. Chapter 3. World Gate, England. London, Diagon Alley. 1 month later, Harry was back at this dive, a month after leaving Dumbledore in disgust by the side of the road, not because he wanted to be, but because what he'd been looking the world over for was here of all places. He'd left England that very day, the day Dumbledore revealed the extent of his treachery, searching ever eastward at every congregation of magic and wizards that he could find, seeking some means of getting back home. He'd started in Spain and worked his way northeast from there, then went south before he hit Asia. The most help he'd gotten had been in Egypt, with the next clues to what he needed being found in France. Italy and Greece weren't even worth mentioning when it came to magical sources of information, although there had been a couple of beasts terrorizing people in those parts and made for a good distraction. Fights didn't last long once he got serious though, unfortunately. After leaving Europe and moving into Asia, Harry found himself faced with more familiar monsters to fight, and the languages spoke more in line with those neighboring Fury in Earthland. It wasn't until he got to the city of Hong Kong that Harry got his first real clue. Su, PLE of the local gods informed him that his father was considered one of them, but he hadn't been to this world in nearly a decade. They also told him of the magic that he and they used to traverse the worlds. And all it cost him for this information was going into hell and vanquishing a few hundred demon armies. Only took him a day. Well, a day on Earth, which was like 100 years in hell. In all honesty, it took him about an hour, finishing up all the demons and putting the fear of a dragon slayer into their leftovers in the equivalent of about a week. They were pretty tough, but for a dragon slayer that could consume and power up using all 4 elements and any combination therein, they never stood a chance. The gods were true to their word and told him what magic they used to traverse the worlds. Unfortunately, Harry was reminded all too well that with gods you had to pay very close attention to the fine print, because while they told him what it was, that did not mean they were going to teach it to him. It was called World Gate, and it was one of the magics that the Monkey King stole from the gods and showed the secrets of to some of his own disciples in the mortal world. At least those were the rumors the Turtle Snake Warrior Lord of the North told him. Which meant that somewhere in the wizarding world, there was a magic scroll that would help him get home. All he had to do was find it, after 3,000 years of it being lost, that is. Harry decided to start in India and work his way east from there. He got into a few more fights, came across plenty of interests. Ting magics and lots more wizards and their various shadow governments. The one on the Hawaiian Islands was particularly interesting. Enough that he was quite sure he never wanted to go there ever again. Yeah, he ate fire and earth magic like they were free snacks most of the time. Didn't mean he wanted to deal with wizards that could use volcano magic more than once. In the Americas, he came across as many diverse forms of magic and types of wizards and magical monsters as there existed in his own world of Earthland. The tribes there had heard of the World Gate magic, but none of them knew where the scrolls detailing it were. It took going from the remains of the Aztec wizards in South America, to the Ice Mage Eskimo wizards in the far north to finally get his next clue. It came from the Canadian Ministry. After he'd helped some Kapoors catch a fugitive or two. Kapoors were the Canadian Ministry of Magic's armed forces, the same as the Arrows for the United States, and the Aurors for the British Ministry of Magic. The Canadian School of Magic, he didn't bother learning the name of the school, used to have the scroll in question in their stacks of books, but during the previous magical war, there was a lot of lost items that were stolen and or sold that shouldn't have been. The only clue that they could give him was that it had been a British terrorist, known as a Death Eater, that had stolen the scroll and had probably pawned it for some gold back in Britain. Which lead Harry back here, to Diagon Alley, asked every vendor he came across about where he might find what he was looking for. So far, 9 out of 10 had all pointed him to the same place. Borgin and Burke's, on Nocturne Alley. That's where he was headed now. He opened the door to the dark and musty old shop with a bang. Several items trembled and jumped, some turned to glare at him. He glared back, allowing a bit of lightning to dance in his eyes. Everything returned to the way it was shortly after. "Can I help you?" An old man with greasy hair and missing teeth came out from the back, a permanent frown etched in his face. "I'm looking for the Scroll of Son Goku, also known as the Scroll of the Monkey King. I have information telling me that you purchased it a little over a decade ago," Harry stated, stepping further into the shop. "I wish to procure this scroll. By any means necessary. If you're going to sell it to me, now would be the time to name your price, because I'm just as likely to tear this place apart looking for it." Borgin briefly considered the oddly dressed lad standing before him, making bold claims. And to be quite honest, he wasn't even sure he knew what the boy was talking about in the first place. Well, could just as well sell him that old dusty scroll that Malfoy had sold him a while back. "Where's your mum and dad, boy? Bit lost are ye?" Borgin finally decided he didn't have time to deal with dark arts seekers, especially not delusional boys. A crack of thunder shattered every scrap of glass in the shop. The bolt of lightning that had caused it had liquefied the case set between them, save for the few objects that had real power, and even they were looking a bit charred. Borgin looked back up and saw that the delusional boy, delusional or not, had quite a lot of power in him, and he knew enough how to use it to cause the proprietor more trouble that it was worth to keep up games. "They're dead," Harry casually answered, like he hadn't just caused untold amount in damages to the store. "Have been for almost a decade. Allow me to introduce myself, since you clearly don't recognize me. Harry Potter." If Borgin had been drinking anything, he would have spit it out. As it was, he could only gape and cough a bit as shock overcame him. Before he could say or do anything else, however, Harry spoke again. "The scroll. Now, if you please." Fumbling, Borgin dashed over to the cabinet where he kept that old dusty scroll that he was planning on scamming the kid with. If it got him out of his shop sooner, he would have thrown the most valuable thing he had in his back room at the kid to get him to go away. After getting the cabinet unlocked, it took only a few moments of digging around until he found the item in question, distinguishable only because it had a funny monkey design on the seal. Literally throwing the scroll at the young boy who lived, Borgin shouted, "There! Now leave and never come back." Harry caught the scroll easily, examined it at a glance, and then broke the seal and opened it up. He pulled out his datapad and made sure his arch-eye magic was already scanning the document and saving all the information, faster even than his eyes could read through it. It wasn't the scroll with the World Gate magic on it, but it was nearly as useful. It was instead a story about how the Monkey King had taken the World Gate magic scroll with him on his journey to the west, and that his journey had gone a lot further west than many suspected. After reading the story, Harry snapped the scroll shut and breathed a deep angry sigh. Turning to Borgin, he pulled out a small leather pouch and tossed it to the greasy proprietor. "Thanks. There's your payment. Don't tell anyone I was here." He then left the shop. After leaving the shop, Harry wasted no time taking to the air and heading north. Once he was past the cloud layer, that is. Once he was out of the city, he broke the sound barrier and was in the country called Scotland within minutes. He headed towards the mountains, slowing down to his original speed only once he'd reached them. The castle he found there, surrounded on all sides by a deep and forbidding forest at the center of a hidden valley between mountains, stood out like a beacon of pure magic. Harry hit the ward line Jew Saint as the trees of the forest below fell away into developed land. Despite his good and innocent intentions, he had neither been invited nor allowed past these wards ever before, and they would not allow him to pass, no matter what he tried. So, having no choice, he found the main gate and landed there and waited. He was less than surprised when he saw who was walking up the path to the gate. A bit disappointed that he wasn't alone, but still not surprised. Dumbledore came up with a stern-looking witch, her hair in a tight bun, on his left and a half-giant wild man on his right. He recognized I am as a half-giant only from having met the full-blooded giants in his travels so far. "You have something here that I need," Harry spoke first before the others could utter a word. "I don't know if you got it before or after I started looking for it, but for the sake of getting home, I'll be polite and just ask for it instead of taking it. Please give me the World Gate scroll hidden here by Son Goku." "Mr. Potter, what a pleasant," Dumbledore started to say, but was interrupted by Harry holding up his datapad with a clear picture of the scroll he was looking for. "Surprise. Won't you please come in?" Minerva, the witch at his side, pulled out her wand, quick enough that Harry quickly pulled back his datapad and clenched his fist, lightning sparking all around it. "Not to worry, Mr. Potter," she assured him with a stern tone. "I am merely unlocking the gate so you may enter the school grounds. Albus tells me we have much to discuss." "Not as much as he thinks we do," Harry smirked and kept his fists at the ready. Though at least they did stop sparking. The gate was opened and Harry stepped through the wards, his fists still clenched tight but no longer sparking. Completely ignoring the witch and the giant, he addressed his harasser and repeated his earlier request, "Give me the scroll hidden here by Son Goku. The scroll containing the secrets of World Gate magic. Please. I'm afraid, Mr. Potter, that I have no idea as to what you are requesting," said Dumbledore as Harry walked onto Hogwarts grounds. "Now, if you'll just..." Harry blasted into the air with a burst of wind. Now that he was in the wards, there was nothing stopping him from continuing his search. First place to look for a magic scroll in what was apparently supposed to be a magic school, the magic library. He gated midair to where the wards were telling him the library was. Now that the headmaster vouched for him as a student, he could feel the place like it was alive. It wasn't really, just very, very magical. As in filled with so much magic that it bordered on having a soul. Not quite, but it was nearly there. Harry had only ever come across one other place that was like that, and it too had been in another world. A digital world at that. Once he was in the library, he quickly found the librarian and asked her where the scroll was. She kinda looked like a vulture, and glared at him way some of the actual birds did when he flew circles around them. After checking her records, she scowled even more and crooned at him, "Awk. The headmaster checked it out the other day. He hasn't returned it yet. Awk, you'll have to speak to him about it." Harry frowned. "I'm really beginning to dislike that old man." Dumbledore and his entourage met him just outside the library. "Where is it?" Harry asked, arms at his sides. Fists clenched, lightning in his eyes. "Mr. Potter, do not address the headmaster in such a tone." Professor McGonagall snapped at him. "It's all right, Minerva, I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it." The silver-maned wizard placated her. "What is it precisely you were referring to, Mr. Potter? Perhaps I can help you find it, According to the librarian, you were the last person to have it." He gestured casually over his shoulder. "So unless you're about to lie to me, or you're in the habit of losing valuable and unique magical scrolls that you borrow from the library, I strongly suggest that you hand it over so I can learn World Gate already and go home. Now, where is it?" "I have no idea to what you're referring to," Professor Dumbledore answered, his eyes twinkling under his shaggy gray eyebrows. "Lie. Mr. Potter, please, we must make arrangement for your schooling. Evasion and lie, since I have not yet officially accepted your offer. Therefore we have nothing to arrange. Your parents, we've had that discussion already, old man," Harry growled, and the temperature in the hallway dropped noticeably. "I don't have the scroll of Son Goku any longer," Dumbledore finally answered. "Awk." The squawk echoed from the library, making even Dumbledore cringe a bit. "How about the scroll of Sun Wukong, hidden here by Mervyn as a favor to the Monkey King himself? You might better know it as the scroll with the monkey pictures on the seal." Dumbledore was definitely sweating by now. "Ah, yes, that scroll," he admitted, absently scratching the back of his head. "Well, it's not like it will do you any good, Mr. Potter," said the headmaster as he pulled the aforementioned scroll out of his robes. "I have tried every unlockin' spell that exists, as has every headmaster before me and a number of scholars that were seeking to learn what was in this scroll. I fail to see how." Harry grabbed the scroll out of the old wizard's hands and held his hand over the inscribed seal binding the scroll. It vanished in a flash of light, and the scroll easily unrolled itself to finally display its secrets. Looking up at the flabbergasted looks he was getting, Harry just shrugged and said, "It was a combination lock, requiring 3 different magic circles applied in the proper order. The combination was on the other scroll that I got from Nocturne Alley earlier today. Now, let's see here." He quickly pulled out his tablet and began scanning the scroll's contents into his archive. While that was in progress, he also began reading through it with just his eyes and soon began to understand the difference between World Gate and his normal gate. For starters, the power requirements. Thankfully it was less than what it took to get the normal gate magic to do the same thing, i.e. cross over into a new world. Harry still wasn't entirely sure how it had happened in the first place, but it obviously had something to do with that hurricane he'd eaten while in Dragon Force mode. So, while less than an unknown, dangerous, nearly impossible to control amount of magical energy, he just needed something like 5 times the amount of power per gate in comparison. Of course that exponentially increased per person or object that he brought with him through the World Gate. And it merely doubled if the world he was gating to was outside of his expected range. He figured the power requirements wouldn't be that tough if he had the opportunity to eat beforehand. Taking a brief sniff of the air, he smiled slightly as he caught a slight whiff of a storm on the horizon. The power portion of the equation taken care of, Harry turned his attention to the exact mechanics. This was dealing with worlds rather than just distance across space on a singular planet. With Gate, the most he had to be aware of was the curvature, rotation, and speed of the planet, as well as any obstacles that might be in his target zone, such as buildings, walls, people, etc. With World Gate, The scale went from planetary to cosmic. And not just different planets in solar systems, not to mention stars and other spatial anomalies, but also the fundamenta. Basics of the vibrational frequency of the world he was gating to by navigating cosmic strings. When it came right down to it, the biggest and, as far as he cared, only major difference between GAT magic and World Gate magic was that they used different magic circles and required completely different uses of magical power between invocation and effect. After he had scanned the scroll completely into his archive, he resealed it and handed it back to Dumbledore before sequestering himself away to learn the basics of his new magic in order to become a master of it as soon as possible. Before he got too far though, the old wizard stopped him. "Mr. Potter," Dumbledore called out, "where do you think you are going?" Harry just glared at the old man before he flipped him the English bird and gated back to London. Hogwarts. 3 weeks later. It took him longer to master than Gate had, but Harry seriously doubted that there were many 10-year-olds, 11 in 2 weeks, that could actually master a lost magic in less than 1 month. Admittedly, Harry kind of cheated with his archive and just uploading the spells directly to his own brain each time he used them rather than spend half a lifetime memorizing them. But he could pull it off. It took a heck of a lot of magical power, but if he used the same amount of power he used in Dragon Force mode, just without actually transforming, then it became easy. He just hoped he never had to use this magic after a hard fight. He might have some trouble with it then. Unfortunately, a big part of World Gate was astrology, the study of movements and positions of celestial bodies. Which made sense, he figured after a bit of time thinking about it. Celestial spirits move between the worlds in accordance with their contracts with celestial mages. Too bad there was more to it than just the relationship between celestial spirits and traveling between worlds. It would seem that, depending on the time of year as well as the position of the stars in the heavens as well as where you were exactly under those heavens, greatly affecting which worlds you could gate to and when. He was still trying to understand the finer points of it, but he got the gist of it. While the portals, if you will, are open all the time and one with the power of World Gate could access them at any time, those same portals are constantly moving in. If he were to use World Gate at the wrong moment, he could wind up on a completely different world. All things considered, after everything that he'd learned, it was an absolute miracle that he had survived overpowering his gate magic and that it brought him to the right world and even where it dropped him off at. Bloody miracle. Of course, just being able to use the spells and power them didn't make him a master. Gating to another world and back did. It wasn't his home, his true home, Earthland with the country of fury and the magic guild known as Fairy Tale. It was actually another Earth. Same everything, except that like Earthland, magic was out in the open, and all the magical creatures in hiding here were part of civilization as normal citizens called Interlanders. Apparently Somethi happened a few years beforehand that wiped out more than half the human population, forcing those that were in hiding to come forth to keep society from erupting into anarchy. When people had Ed pointing at him and shouting about demons, he decided to leave before being able to learn much else. Now, he was back at Hogwarts, partly to figure out when and where he'd need to be to get back to his home. But also to get Dumbledore off his back once and for all. Thankfully he was out for the day when Harry arrived, leaving him ample time to get the assistance of the astronomy professor and cut down his work by more than half. Sadly, Dumbledore was back by dinner time, just after Harry discovered where he needed to be in order to get home. Even more depressing, that location was Hogwarts itself. Specifically the highest point of the castle, which he'd been told was the top of the astronomy tower. Which was ironic because that was the absolute lowest elevation he could be at in this part of the world for it to work. Normally he'd just fly up, but the power requirements were prohibitively high. He couldn't use any other magic while powering up and then using World Gate. If he did, well, he would fall short of the mark and that would not be good. No, not good at all. "Ah, Harry, I'd heard you had come back," Dumbledore called as Harry entered the Great Hall as those living in Castle were just sitting down to dinner. "Please, join us. I'm afraid you're a bit early for." "Grr." Harry let out an exasperated growl. "For the last time, old man, I'm not joining your school. I've learned what I needed to learn here already." I'm going home at midnight anyway. That's when the celestial paths align and I can use World Gate to finally get home. He said this even while sitting down and piling on the food to his plate. Oh, and thanks, don't mind if I do. Harry, there is much you have yet to understand, Dumbledore pleaded with the young wizard. You have a destiny here. A great purpose that only you can fulfill. MMHM, he mumbled around bulging cheeks. You must stay and fulfill that destiny. Your fate lies here, at Hogwarts. The headmaster pleaded. MMHM, Y swallowed and proceeded to fill his mouth to capacity yet again. Please, Harry, you must listen to reason. Harry, are you even listening to me? MMHM, the Storm Dragon Slayer gulped down an pitcher of juice to wash down his food. Mr. Potter, the old wizard bellowed. You're ruining dinner, Albus, Professor McGonagall pointed out, not reacting any further to her employer's exclamations. Over the past month, since having the opportunity to meet and speak with Harry on several occasions, she'd lost all illusion over the older wizard's notoriety and fame. There were some things she would always be grateful to him for and had experienced alongside him that had earned him her friendship and respect. Since his mistakes in regards to young Harry Potter had come to light, she still counted him as a friend. But a great deal of the respect and trust she'd once had in him had vanished like shadows before the dawn. As such, she had firmly placed herself on Harry's side of all matters having to do with Dumbledore's arguments with the lad. In other words, Harry could do what he wanted, Dumbledore's wishes be damned. The other professors had jumped at Dumbledore's shout, but at McGonagall's quiet recrimination. They resumed eating, doing their best to ignore the ongoing, if one-sided, argument. Finally, half the food had been eaten, leaving only what had already been on the other meal-goers' plates. And Harry let out a healthy burp. Ah, thanks for the meal. He grinned, wiping his mouth. Now I've just got to power up for tonight and then I'm off home. Thanks for your hospitality, everyone. He waved to the seated teachers as he walked out the door. Mr. Potter. Dumbledore jumped to his feet and soon chased after the young dragon slayer. Harry had already gated away. That had been particularly frustrating for the wizards of Hogwarts, as they all knew why you could not apparate in Hogwarts. Apparently what Harry did wasn't apparition. He gated back to Hogwarts. Straight to the top of the astronomy tower, all his belongings and more than that all his gold and everything from the vaults the goblins had held for him in trust at his side and more. Importantly, the large egg he'd been taking care of for weeks now wrapped up in a warm electric blanket. It had been jumping and moving about for the past day or so. He hoped that it would hatch soon. But not before he had them both back home in Earthland. Everything arranged around him, he sat down and started gathering his magic power. The silver-blue glowing magic circle for World Gate appeared beneath him, encompassing all of his belongings with him at the exact center. Not long after, he heard the door to the top of the tower creak open. Mr. Potter. Harry growled again, but didn't stop gathering his magic power. He did keep his eyes shut and stayed in the meditation pose that helped him in the endeavor though, effectively ignoring the interruption entirely. Mr. Potter, I feel I owe you an apology, said Dumbledore. Sounding quite distraught, he snorted, thinking the sarcastic comment to himself, "Ya think." But he didn't speak out loud. The magic buildup remained stable and constant as the silence dragged on. Harry didn't want anything to go wrong, so he was being extra careful with this. Mr. Potter. Harry. Dumbledore finally broke the silence. His ire raising, he briefly lost control and gathered a bit too much magic too quickly, resulting in a sharp crack as a spark of small lightning left a scorch mark on the stones at Dumbledore's feet. Quelling his racing heart, the old wizard cleared his throat and heretofore referred to the Dragon Slayer by his surname. Mr. Potter, may I attempt to explain my actions and choices to you? Harry frowned, but remained where he was, silent and still, redoubling his control to make up for his brief loss of said control. Dumbledore ranted on for a while, talking about some old friend of his that he fought with and stole some magic wand from. Then he harped on about responsibility, and duty, and meaningless drivel for a while, before moving on to subjects that tested Harry's restraint more than he thought it would. He talked about the murderer of Harry's biological parents. He half ignored the old fool for most of it, and the rest he allowed to add to his archive file on the wizard. Meanwhile, he continued to gather and pool his magical power, focusing it on the world gate spell he was powering. Anytime after midnight for the next 2.5 months, the midsummer season, in other words, he could go back and forth between England and Fury, provided he had the magical power to spend on it, that is. After the stars fell out of alignment, while it would still be possible to travel between the worlds. In order to get from this Earth to Earthland and vice versa, the geographical location would change, in both cases. Odd that the alignment changed right at the end of August, but Harry put such thoughts out of his mind for the time being. Finally, he'd gathered all the power he needed, and at virtually the same time, he could feel everything coming into alignment. He stood to his feet and the glow of the magic circle brightened in response. "Mr. Potter," Dumbledore cried over the rising magic, "have you heard anything I've said?" "Yes, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm going home right now," he answered. "But the prophecy," the old man shouted, moving forward into the range of the magic circle. Harry didn't notice. He was too busy focusing on the spell and allowing it to take him back to fairy tale. Gate. Open. Ah! Harry screamed, without any other warning, as he triggered the world gate magic. The light of the magic circle built up in intensity, and everything within its range was briefly suspended from the effects of gravity before the light and magical energy ignited in a blinding flash as what was in one place disappeared, and reappeared in a place it had not been. Earthland Magnolia, Fury Fairy Tale Guildhall, July 21st, X 780. "Master," cried Urza, "any word?" The short, bald old man sitting atop the bar muttered, his eyes closed in contemplation. Happy agreed. Flying over. Natsu finally mastered his new magic, and he wants to show it off for Harry Senpai. The third master of the Magic Guild of Fairy Tale mumbled once more. "Master, are you awake?" Lysana asked from the man's feet. A bubble could now be seen coming from the size-changing wizard's nose. Tick marks slowly exploded across half the guild's faces, but it was Mirajan who moved first. Partially transforming her fist into a demonic claw and then slamming it across the master's head. "Hey old man, wake up," she snarled, her demonic fist glowing with dark power. "Any word on my Harry-kun yet?" "Your Harry-kun," Urza growled. Mirajan smirked and allowed the partial takeover to fall away as she glared right back at her rival. "That's right, my Harry-kun. He's been missing for weeks now, and his birthday is coming up soon. I have a real treat planned for him. I'm sure he'll be ever so grateful." "Mirane," Lysana exclaimed, embarrassed at the not subtle at all innuendo. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a magic circle opened up in midair in the center of the guild hall. Everyone took notice of it instantly, and for a few brief seconds could only stare at it. Makarov, the master of fairy tale, saw it and instantly recognized what it meant. He immediately used his Titan magic to amplify his voice and shouted out a warning. "Everyone, clear the hall. Harry is coming home to US. And he's probably going to make a heck of a mess doing it." The magic circle slowly moved down and seemed to prove the master's statement true as anything. In the space it traversed disappeared as though erased from existence, leaving in its place Harry Potter and his stuff. Oh, and one very disoriented headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore. Harry slowly blinked his eyes open and took a look around. His face broke out into an open grin. A beat later, an explosion of noise that would have knocked him off his feet had he been standing came from everyone preset in the building. "Harry!" Everyone shouted, and suddenly the more exuberant of those that had missed the young dragon slayer were dive-bombing him with hugs and warm embraces. It took a while, a longer than it should have been while, but eventually Harry managed to dig himself out of the dog pile and was standing before the master, grinning like mad. "Tadaima, master," Harry bowed. "I have returned." The short old man mumbled. "With company, I see." Harry didn't bother restraining himself as he sighed and rolled his eyes without even having to look at the stowaway. "I had to use lost magic to return. Forgive me, but I'm still working on my fine control. I'll return him once I've figured out how." He scratched the back of his head as he suddenly realized that he could think of no way to return the headmaster without going with him. Harry," Dumbledore stuttered, still struggling to get to his feet. Where is this place? My home, Harry answered in English before switching back to his native language to address the rest of the guild. He's the headmaster of a magic school in the world where I landed when my gate spell malfunctioned. And was that even possible in the first place? The master growled, arms crossed. You, who has been bragging that you had completely mastered that magic? Harry blushed and ducked his head, embarrassed. I overpowered it. Also, I think something I ate disagreed with me as I retained almost 0 power after it had fully expired in the spell. The master nodded, having spoken with Mistogan the very same day Harry had disappeared, 3.5 weeks ago. Harry Neeson, Natsu suddenly screamed, jumping out of the crowd. You'll never guess what happened while you were gone. Harry took one look at the pink-haired dragon slayer and replied, Lysana taught you transformation magic and you learned you're really good at it. Lysana taught me transformation magic and I'm really good at it, Natsu exclaimed. Half a beat later, the proverbial light bulb came on and he shouted out, Hey! Who told? You've still got Happy's tail coming out of your pants, Harry pointed and shrugged. Oh, Natsu nodded and then promptly started to chase his own tail. Harry, 2 voices rang out together. The storm dragon slayer turned and blinked when he caught sight of both Mirajan and Urza standing before him. Arms crossed and ticked expressions on their faces. He wasn't sure exactly why, but he began to sweat all of a sudden. Hi girls. He waved and gave them a half-hearted smile. Were you thinking leaving me behind with her? They both shouted, pointing at each other. It was an accident, he protested. You left me with her. They shouted again. I just spent 3.5 months on another world. It took me 2 of those months of scouring whole countries just to find a clue about how to get back and then the 3rd month tracking it down. It was an accident, he told them, hoping it would placate their tempers. 3 months, the master exclaimed, his brow raised in surprise. Yeah, why? Harry turned his attention to the master. Urza and Mira Jane had likewise cooled their tempers and exchanged startled looks. Urza was the one to answer her friend however. Harry, you have been gone for only 3.5 weeks. We've been worried sicken. We're only just starting to ask questions about where you could have ended up. Harry blinked and then tilted his head in consideration. He thought out loud. Well, either I performed the spell wrong in transition time alongside space when traversing worlds, or there is a significant difference between the passage of time here and there. Although that is somewhat of a ridiculous equation. I mean, 1 week here is 1 month there. But, then again, a day is only 24 hours there, and here's it's 25.25 hours. Harry, the master growled, we don't talk about the lost hours anymore. Right, you're right, I'm sorry, master. Harry bowed his head as everyone got really quiet. The lost hours was always a sensitive subject. Excuse me, Professor Dumbledore spoke in the quiet. Apparently he'd finally gathered enough of his wits to no stutter every other word. Hi there, sorry about the trouble. The master waved and smiled cheerily in what everyone knew to be his counsel voice. Basically saying and doing whatever it took to stay out of trouble after trouble had already been had. I'll make sure this boy repays everything he broke or destroyed. Through hard work too, master, Harry protested. No trouble at all, Dumbledore waved off the bribe, not that it was much of one. Although I am hoping that you might be able to answer one thing for me if you please. English, the master scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, I'll do my best kind sir. You are in our guild hall. We are the Magic Guild Fairy Tale. And as for more specifics than that, you're in the city of Magnolia in the country of Fury within the world we call Earthland. Earthland, Dumbledore repeated. They call the planet Earth. Where he's from, Harry supplied. Earth what? Urza asked. Harry shrugged and replied, just Earth. Really unimaginative, and the wizards living there are even worse than the whole population of commoners. The mage called Titania acknowledged. By any chance, good sir, might you explain to me what it is exactly that you, fairy tale, does precisely? Dumbledore then asked the master. We take in various jobs that people need doing and our wizards go out and complete the jobs with their magic, the diminutive master replied. Why do you ask? And how does one, typically, go about requesting these jobs? And perhaps is there a way of ensuring that a specific wizard be assigned the task? Dumbledore's eyes were twinkling brightly now. Harry frowned, not liking where this line of questioning was going. The master scratched his chin, his eyes closed as he nodded. His head, contemplating something. Finally he opened his eyes and said to Dumbledore, "Come with me. We'll see what sort of arrangement we can come up with. Understand, we charge a fee just for posting or accepting the jobs, and then there must also be a reward for the wizard who accepts the job." "I understand completely." Dumbledore followed along behind Fairy Tale's master. "I really don't like where that is headed," Harry grumbled. A few hours later, he was proven right as Urza dragged him away from his happy end. Natsu's place at the master's beckoning. The fact that Dumbledore was standing there beside him, usually where a client or requester stood for one of the jobs Harry really hated doing, told him the rest. Before either old man could say a word, Harry slumped down in his seat, arms crossed, and stated as plainly as he could, "No. I'm not doing it. I refuse the job." "Then you can't do any more S-rank ed jobs until you're an S-rank member of the guild," the master replied without skipping a beat. "Then I'm not doing any of those D-rank weather manipulation jobs you've been selling at a premium since I joined the guild either," he countered. "Then you won't be considered for any of the future S-ranked exams, for the next 7 years," the master laid down the final card in his hand. Harry frowned. He had one final card of his own, but everyone in the room right now knew he wouldn't play it. And even if he did, they also knew he'd be bluffing. "I'm still not doing it. And you need me to do those D-ranked jobs more than I need to be challenged by the S-ranked jobs. So there." He stuck his tongue out at Dumbledore. "It's a school, not a guild," the master tried to explain. "I know all about it," Harry argued. "I spent over a week there preparing to get back after all. With your new magic you can come and go as you please between here and there. And the time difference is probably just in the way that you used it this time. A bit more experience and you won't be missing months or weeks in time difference. Besides, this is a type of magic that not only is rare on our world, it's a type of magic that has truly never been seen, if only because we never developed the like. Think about it." Harry's frown deepened. "What's the catch? I already brought everything that I ever owned in that world back with me. Including all the gold I would ever need. I could go searching for the dragons and never take another job for the rest of my life and I'd still be set." "7, the master answered. "7, there are, as you say, 7 catches to this job," he replied. Harry uncrossed his arms and looked between the two. The master, a man he respected and loved as much as he ever had a Zulong, who acted like a teenager most of the time and was one of the 10 wizard saints of their world, considered the best of the best by just about everybody. Normally, he bore a silly grin and a sly look of perversion on his face as he freely checked out all the attractive female mages of the guild and walking about town. Right now, there was no trace of the grin. He was as serious as Harry had ever seen him. And considering the last few times he'd seen him that serious, that sobered the young dragon slayer's attitude real quick. Dumbledore looked guilty, reluctant, and trapped. Why? Means whatever they were about to tell him, it was undoubtedly the truth, and certain truths that Dumbledore had obviously wanted kept under his hat for as long as possible. "I'm listening." He sat back and recrossed his arms. Earthland Magnolia, Fury Fairy Tale Guildhall, August 31st, X 780. Harry had now gone back and forth between his birth dimension and his home dimension several times now. He'd even discovered how to maximize his use of the magic, thereby minimalizing the power requirements to something far more manageable than what he'd done before. Furthermore, with the experience he'd gained, he could now more safely navigate the paths between the worlds so that there wasn't any more time dilation, and so he didn't have to adhere as strictly to his placement on the planet prior to gating. He'd returned Dumbledore, after assuring the headmaster that he would take the job. It was listed with the guild as a 7-year S-rank job. After returning Dumbledore, the master announced that the next S-rank exam would take place the following week, and that there were 2 available spots. Harry was among the candidates, but this time he didn't bow out or decline it. Mirajan was another candidate. There were others, But Harry was too distracted to pay much attention. The exam, as it did every year, took place on Tenro Island with several challenges that were supervised by the C. S-rank wizards with the Master as the only judge. Things went smoothly, and with Urza and Gildarts there, Harry felt adequately challenged. In the end, either because of the deal with Dumbledore, or because he'd been right in all his bragging and he could have passed the S-rank exam any time he wanted to, Harry was made an S-rank fairy tale wizard. Mirajan filled the other slot. That still left him with a couple weeks before he had to leave for school, but as it would just so happen, the very day that he got back from Tenro Island, the egg that he'd found on his Earth, his birth world, and had been taken care of, finally decided to hatch. While he was busy with the S-rank exam, he'd asked Natsu and Happy to egg sit for him. He was sure they got Lysana to help out, and judging by Happy's apparent health, they had good experience. Still, he was very glad to have gotten back in time for the egg to hatch. Thinking back on it, he knew he would remember that moment for a long time to come. August 11th, X780. Nay, Harry ni-san, Natsu shouted, barreling through the front door of the guild. "'Bout time you got back. Here." He tossed the Storm Dragon Slayer the white and green egg he'd been carrying around. Harry quickly caught it with ease, looking surprised at the Fire Dragon Slayer. He'd just gotten back from doing his shopping on Diagon Alley, and one of the trips he was taking back and forth between Earthland and Earth so he could get more experience with his new lost magic. Still, this was the first time in his many trips that Natsu indicated he didn't like eggs sitting for him. He considered his fellow Dragon Slayer for a few moments before asking, "Okay, what happened?" A sweat drop appeared on Natsu's head and his eyes went all shifty as he started trying to evade the question. Saying that nothing was wrong and other stuff like that. Harry didn't believe him. "Did you and Lysana have a fight?" Harry asked as he adjusted his grip on the egg. It kept jumping and shifting around a bit. "No," Natsu said a little too quickly. "Where's Happy?" "Here." Natsu's mood darkened, and he grumbled, "With Lysana." Harry considered, is he jealous of the egg? Natsu's half-hearted evasions indicated that was pretty close to the truth, although perhaps not all of it. Before the conversation could go much further, the egg in Harry's hands jumped violently. He frowned, managing to catch it without difficulty. He let loose a small static charge, which always seemed to calm it down. This time, however, that seemed to make it even more restless and it started shaking and jumping like crazy in Harry's arms. Enough that he had trouble holding onto it. "Whoa-hoo," Natsu exclaimed, seeing the egg jump about in Harry's arms. "Looks like it's ready to hatch. Hey everybody, Harry's egg is about to hatch." Really, Happy was suddenly there, wings glowing brightly, indicating just how fast he'd just flown. The egg finally wormed its way free of Harry's grip and landed at his feet. Moments after that, it began to crack, and a few heart-pounding seconds after that, the egg exploded and a shining green light shot up out of it. Everyone was momentarily blinded, but the light faded quickly to reveal a small white and green striped kitten with tiny wings keeping it up in the air. The stripes were more like tiger stripes, though they seemed to be shaped like lightning bolts. While the belly was pure white, like with Happy, the rest were shades of green. Another cat. Yay! Happy was up in the air with joy. The kitten floated down and landed on top of Harry's head with a purr. And then everybody was celebrating. Present day, Harry had named his cat Hedwig. It was the name of a famous witch that helped end a number of the goblin rebellions, usually by being the one to kick the most goblin ass. She, his cat, liked spending most of her time with him, and though Happy tried to show her the ropes, Harry had discovered she was more intelligent than most expected. Not that Happy was dumb or anything, but his time around Natsu probably hadn't helped matters. Harry had already taught Hedwig the basics of reading, writing and language. Several languages in fact, their native language here on Earthland, and then also English since it was the one that they'd be using the most often while at school, and then simply because she asked he also taught her French, German, Spanish, Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin, Elvish, Murmish, Gobbledygook, and how to understand dragons. You kind of have to be a dragon to speak dragon, but it's easy enough to understand if you know what to listen and watch for. Of course, in order to get through all of that information in the short amount of time that they had, Harry had to teach Hedwig archive magic. And seeing as how the master wasn't about to do that, again, it was truly left up to the Dragon Slayer, who truly sucked at using archive magic. As compensation, however, he seemed to be pretty good at teaching it. As Hedwig had almost easily mastered the magic, like it had been as instinctive as her arrow magic, the wings that let her and Happy fly. She could even create the light screens that he couldn't, having to rely on his computer for most of his archive use. As it was, she was looking forward to going to Hogwarts perhaps even more than he was. Well, Hedwig, he sighed, putting the last of his needed supplies in his trunk and then vanishing it into his magical space, which was similar to the magic that Urza used most of the time, with the exception being that he could only hold a handful of items in it literally. 3 heavy items was his maximum limit. Ready. I was born ready for this. She cheered from atop his head. The Exceed named Hedwig is voiced by Tara Strong, the same actress that does Ben in the original Ben 10 cartoon, just with a female tone instead of a young boy's. Smiley face. Enjoy. Closing square bracket. Glad we already made our goodbyes then, he chuckled, adding, this time. Anyway. Gate. Open. He held up his hand and the magic circle for World Gate appeared at his feet and quickly shot up, taking Harry and Hedwig with it as it disappeared. End. Harry Potter and Fairy Tale. Anne. I hereby issue this challenge. Write the 7 years of Harry's 7-year S-class job so that he graduates Hogwarts, defeats Voldemort, etc. just in time for him to participate as an examiner in the S-class exams saga, and be there when Acnologia shows up. During the 7-year job, Harry makes friends and can go home for vacations. As I hinted at, Harry's surprisingly good at teaching others GICS that he himself may not be so good at, so he's allowed and expected to teach Ron and Hermione and his other friends, Earthland, magics. Must-haves. Harry teaches Hermione archive magic, and she's a bloody prodigy at it. And Harry gets jealous. Harry teaches Ron some kind of Earthland magic. Hedwig is the one that is compatible with the Holly and Phoenix Feather wand. Harry's wand is made up of whatever material you want it to be, or he could have had one made to order, or he found it on his globe-trotting adventures of the summer before. Hedwig attends classes with Harry and is sorted same as him. Harry actually fights the dragon in 4th year Tri-Wizard tournament. Can-haves. I came up with the idea of a creation magic called Cocoa Make, intending to have Ron being able to make all different kinds of chocolate and candies whenever and whatever he wants. This is up for grabs if anybody wants to use it, even for some other kind of story that isn't an HP crossover. A rivalry between Harry and the Weasley twins. Dumbledore bashing is allowed, even expected, but not required. Harry treats Malfoy like, pardon the non-crossover reference. Kakashi treats Guy whenever Guy is talking to him. Harry can fight the basilisk without the hat, sword, or fox, because of his goggles. Hagrid's dragon doesn't get shipped off to Romania. Harry helps him train it. Harry goes berserker when in the presence of Dementors and they quit after a week with him blasting them non-stop. Harry takes Ron, Hermione, and any other friends he's made with him back to Fairy Tale during certain vacations, and 5th year, where Ginny Weasley models herself after Urza, and Luna and Happy both speak the same language. Crossover potential. I leave the shipping up to the individual author. But I kind of like the idea of Harry and Lucy getting along and eventually getting involved with one another. Crossover potential. What if Harry Potter, in Daedalus, is the Dark Lord, and also the Nay that has been tipping off the Dark Guild of Fairy Tale to the kingdom's movements and supplying them with magic. Therefore, when he shows up, everybody is bowing and scraping the floor towards him. Crossover potential. What if Harry brings the DSA, Dragon Slayer Alliance, with him as part of the alliance in facing Oración Cease and destroying Nirvana? Who would come? Who would they fight? Can't-haves. Absolutely no Weasley bashing. There's enough of that crap on the web already. Makes it hard to actually enjoy some potentially great H fanfics. Harems, / and crack fic. Material. Harry can have more than one girlfriend, just not at the same time, and not so they're okay with him dating both or more of them together. Let's be honest, it's not realistic, and this is an anime crossover, where guys get sledgehammered for being perverts and girls go all blush why and steam-faced at the slightest compromising situation or revelation of their own perversion. Bonus points. Having Urza go, eep, at least once. Come up with a completely original catchphrase for Harry and have him say it at least once every chapter. Putting not just Harry, but Hermione and Ron in houses other than Gryffindor. With good reasons. Have Harry decide that Draco is unworthy of being called Dragon in Latin and comes up with a fitting replacement name for him, and from that point on refuse to identify Malfoy as anything other than that fitting name. Final part of this challenge is that you must send me a link when and wherever you post it so I can favorite it and put links to it on my author's page. Enjoy and have fun with it.